talk about is a program put together by Trinity United Church, Legon. And the topics that we discuss is for everyone. It's for you as a Christian. It's to give you enough arsenals to cope with situations that happen with each and every one of us from day to day. Today we're looking at coping with loss, grieving a loved one. And that's the reason that we have, she says I shouldn't call her doctor, but I've said doctor already. Lily Poby. I say Lily is, expert in such, issues. So, Lily, what first do you have to say about this topic? But before, we are live on our social media platform, Trinity United Church, Legon, on both YouTube and Facebook. You can send your comments and questions to our social media platforms, as I've mentioned, and then to WhatsApp number 0501579996 at the appropriate time. So, Lily, back to what you have to say about the topic in generality.
Okay. Yes, I think it's an important topic for us to look at and to consider, because death is unfortunately a part of our lives here on earth. So it's something that, grief is something that we will all come across in one form or another eventually. So it's a good idea to think about ways in which we can cope with that loss and how we can help ourselves get through that process of grieving somebody that we love who is not with us anymore.
And then you are talking about process. So in the grieving, so just basically, outline to us what are some of the things that we go through as the person who is grieving the loss. What are maybe unblock some of the things that we go through from one stage to the other, and then
All right. So yes, grieving is a process, or it's almost like a cycle. Mm-hmm. We go through different stages when there's that kind of loss that we experience. Most of the time, it starts with a process of denial. It feels unreal to us when there's somebody who is close to us who is no longer there. And this is especially when it's a sudden death or an unexpected death. It feels as though you're dreaming, or as if somebody would come and tell you, oh, it was all a joke or something, or a prank. So there's usually, in the beginning, quite a bit of denial. Sometimes we can move quickly into anger, as it feels like it's an injustice or it's unfair, or we don't know why this should happen to the person or to us. So anger can also be one of the reactions that we get to grief. And sometimes that anger is sort of directed towards people. Mm-hmm. So if somebody was maybe in hospital, we could be angry at perhaps was there some negligence, or did people not do what they needed to do? Or if there was a car accident, we will be angry at the driver of another car or something.
Sorry for the interruption, but I want us to deal with the two that you have mentioned. Then we'll continue from there. Mm-hmm. Now, the first, denial. Mm-hmm. I was speaking with a friend whose father passed on, and he said he was at the hospital, and then the facial expression of the doctor and the nurse was quite not, understandable to him. They started leaving him alone, and with his arms folded, he was just standing there.
Oh dear!
And then it was the doctor who had gone to tell someone to tell him that his father had passed on. He said he stood there for 1 hour.
Oh, after he was told.
Yes, he didn't know.
Yeah.
He didn't know what to do. He wasn't even aware that he had been standing there for 1 hour with his arms folded and just looking. With such a person, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a normal reaction. It really is, because the thing with death is that, and that is for those who get left behind. I mean, as Christians, we always know, or we anticipate that our loved one is going to a better place, right? Or they're going to heaven to be with the Lord. So for that person, in some ways, they are in a better space. But for those of us left behind, we now have to try and make sense of this loss, and it feels like you've lost your anchor, something that, and it might be somebody that was connected to you in a peripheral manner, but their presence not being there anymore sometimes can hit you quite hard.
Because you've been with the person for quite some time.
You've been with the person.
That's certain,
Exactly. So you feel like you are drifting or you're floating around, and things don't quite make sense. The world doesn't feel quite stable sometimes to you anymore. So it's not surprising that he was just standing there, because logically you can't think what to do next. You know, having to process that situation emotionally and then take steps to then act. That process can be broken by the heaviness of what you are feeling.
So if I were there, would it be okay with me to go and tell the person, oh, and yes, she why? Everything is okay. Is that the right thing to do?
Telling the person that it is okay, everything will be okay. It might be our instinct to do that as a way to comfort them. But a lot of the time they are reeling. They're still reeling from that shock or that loss. That for one, it may not register, what you're saying may not register for them, but for another, they may feel the injustice of it, and somebody might ask, what do you know about it? What do you think you know about what I'm going through? Why would you tell me it's okay, you know, when I've just lost someone I love? So as much as possible, we should try and avoid those kinds of things. We are trying to help though, which is good, but some of the words that we say become it makes the person feel the loss a bit deeper.
Sometimes do we need to speak at all to such a person who is grieving?
No. I mean, with the example you gave of your friend, there's a possibility that if you had gone and just held him by the hand and led him to go and said, he would have quietly come with you.
Because he was not
very
even aware he has been
docile.
standing there for over 1 hour.
Exactly. So he may not even be aware of the world around him quite well. He would just have gone with you. Sometimes we don't need to say anything, but our presence there can be a comfort to the person when they think back and they remember. So you can sit with the person, you can hold their hand, you can put your arm around them, but let's avoid the things we say like, don't cry, oh, are you still crying, you've cried enough, and things like that. It's trying to help them, because sometimes we are confronted with this situation, we don't know what to say to the person. Some of them are very hard when you hear of the loss, and we are not sure what to say, but we should not tell the person how to feel. Let them express the grief the way they need to. That's the more important support you can give. Yeah.
And if it's a man who is grieving a lost one, we are told that the men do not want to show their emotions.
Yeah.
So they will not cry.
Yeah.
You know, they won't do anything untoward.
Yeah.
Sorry for the use of that word.
Yeah.
You know. So, but the women are different.
Yeah.
So if it's a woman who is grieving a loss, what do you do?
Yeah. I think
the person is crying.
Yeah. The way our society is, we expect, or we allow women to grieve openly and outwardly. It isn't seen as a weakness per se, but there's a certain sense of a lot of men feel that they don't have that space to show that weakness, or even if they do, some people may have the tears running down their face, but they won't sob or weep openly as much as women would. As I said, you need to let people express it the way they are comfortable expressing, because what would work for you may not work for someone else. But the reality is that it's got to come out somehow. Mm-hmm. For some people, and especially with a lot of men, they end up focusing on the tasks and the details of planning the memorial, to take their minds away. Exactly. So you focus on those things, or you focus on sort of being strong for everybody who is falling apart because of what they've gone through and all of that. Some women would then, if they are allowed to cry and grieve and sob and all of that, then they find the strength and then they keep moving forward. Once in a while, you find yourself crying a bit again, but you'll find ways to gather yourself and keep going. So we have to give the space for people to do it the way it makes sense to them. Although, of course, we have to be careful that we do not also let people spiral out of control and sometimes do wrong things.
That's when people get angry. Those who are grieving a loss.
Yes, exactly. They are very angry, and then they take it out on everybody else. Oh. That's not beneficial. It's not helpful to the process. Or some people start drinking just so that they don't feel that pain. Alcohol can deaden your sensations. You don't feel the pain as much, so they'll drink, and that creates problems as well. So, in as much as we have to let people grieve the way they need to, we also need to be able to support them in ways and know when to tell them that, you know what, I'm concerned about how you're reacting to this, and your behavior is actually creating problems. So we need to find another channel for you to grieve. Yeah.
Yeah, so we've talked about denial and then anger. Which other point would you want to raise?
Sometimes people tend to fall into a bit of a depression. Not necessarily like clinically diagnosed, but you feel at a loss. You feel real sadness that is like intense for the person, because yes, you've lost somebody, you've lost something. There's an aspect of your life that is not the same anymore.
So when you feel depressed, I just want to find out.
Yes.
Could be a technical term. Depressed. Are you hopeless?
You feel not necessarily hopeless, but you feel an intense weight of sadness, of despair, of loss, of having lost something that was of value to you. So people do go through that stage as well, where sometimes it can feel like what is the point of life if we're going to then suddenly die or go
with
through
such
things.
a person. It's not about sympathizing with the person.
No.
It's about empathizing.
Empathizing, exactly.
When you experts talk about empathy, what are some of the things that are involved?
So it is really about putting yourself in the other shoes means that, which is empathy. It means you need to try and imagine if you were in that situation. Right. What are some of the things that you would appreciate others doing for you? And most of the time, you'll find that people will say, I appreciate it when you ask me what I want rather than tell me what I should do. So people saying, okay, to get through the grief, you have to do A and B and C. Don't think about the person. Or, only allow yourself to cry for a few days and then you have to stop and things like that. But people appreciate when you allow them to express it the way they need to. When and as and when they need to, and in the circumstances that they require. So being more open and inclusive to people can help them feel as though you're trying to understand what they're going through, or you're empathizing with what they're going through, and allowing them to work through the grief themselves.
You've touched on one very important point, the inclusive mindedness. So as the person is grieving, the person is also thinking about how to go around about the burial in general, the funeral, things that have to be done. So this inclusive mindedness, can you bring it into the picture so that people who go into such a situation could prepare themselves mentally, at least, to face such a situation?
Yeah. So when, and this is particularly in our part of the world, when things like this happen, you have to remember that there are going to be so many opinions. So many opinions and suggestions and actually sometimes demands on your time and on your process and all of that. Particularly because the families, extended families, are very much involved in planning these things. It is in those moments that you have to remember to pick your battles carefully or to pick them wisely. Including other people's points of view is okay, and sometimes actually is beneficial, because then you don't have to worry so much about so many details. If you delegate some of the things let's say among siblings, everybody is in charge of a particular thing, including the family members who, that's the extended family, who would do what, or to what extent they would make some of the decisions and so on. You have to be willing to be open to those kinds of things. But having said that, it's also sometimes necessary to take certain firm, or for somebody to take certain firm decisions. So dialogue is great, inclusion of opinions and perspectives is great, but at the end of the day, a decision will have to be made. And sometimes it helps when let's say the siblings or whoever is going to be running around and doing all the preparations for the funeral. Sometimes it helps when you decide amongst yourself, what do we do when a decision needs to be made? And let's say there's disagreements. Maybe there will be some older family member who can intervene, whom you would all appreciate or respect their point of view, to listen to all of the different sides and help you decide. Because you see, the process of grieving, with all of the emotions that are going around and the details you have to think about for funerals, the last thing you want is to brew frustration and strife between siblings or between family members. Some people do that just to be difficult. But as much as possible, if you can avoid it, you should avoid it and come up with a way in which you can resolve these things ahead of time before they come up.
So if you are siblings, for instance, and a dear member of your family is passed on, and you are grieving such a loss, but just as you have mentioned about the inclusive mindedness, have it in mind that you are not the only one. Maybe your father or mother loved so much, or whoever has passed on loved so much.
Exactly.
And the love also must have been extended to the other ones. So
exactly.
in the preparation
of
the final funeral rites and all that, bring other people in.
Exactly.
Or else, this is a question that I'm putting to you in form of a comment. Or else they are going to see you as if you are the only one who matters. And all of us who are this on the other side, we're just out of the picture.
Yeah. And you've got to constantly remind yourself, with the frustrations that may come up, you have to remind yourself that it's really about the person that you're trying to honor with the service. And so if it means you have to close your eyes to some of the irritating things going around, just so that there's peace and then the process can go on smoothly, beautifully, you give the honor to the loved one that you are trying to do. Sometimes you have to make a conscious decision to turn away from certain provocations. Because yes, the other people may also be trying to honor that person, but in a different way from you. At the end of the day, it is for the person who has passed away. That should be a mantra in your mind constantly, that it's not about me, it's not about them, it's about our loved one.
Lily, you mentioned firm decisions. And well, that's just what I'm thinking.
Sure.
Sometimes the firm decisions come by way of finances.
Yeah.
You know, I haven't been part of funeral arrangements or preparations, so many of them. At least just about 2 or so. But what I've seen is that sometimes certain people come up, or the main people in the family come up and then raise an amount. This is what we are going to use for this funeral. And you can see it's way ahead, on top of your head, and not attainable.
Yeah.
Is that somehow one of the ways that you can also be fair?
Yeah. And do you mean the extended family?
Yes. They'll mention some huge figure.
But if you don't have it, you don't have it. I think that we've got to sometimes learn to be assertive.
Okay.
Now, assertiveness is not really just about speaking your mind, but it's about understanding or identifying ways in which you can say what you need to say in an appropriate manner that it does not ruffle feathers, or at least as few feathers as possible. Because if you cannot afford, let's say, a 20,000 CD casket, and the extended family is insisting on that, you've got to find a way to tell them that this is as much as we can do, and this is what we are able to provide for our loved one. Again, it might help if you are able to find somebody, let's say older, or somebody who is respected, to intervene for you when the family is insisting on something. So the person goes ahead of you guys to say, well, this is what the reality that the children say they can afford, or this is what they would like to do. Most of the time, unless everybody in the family is just trying to be difficult, but you'll find that those kinds of interventions can create a difference. Well, we may not see it because we are so frustrated or angry, and we see the extended family is just trying to be wicked and things like that. But we have to find ways to dialogue, because by our traditional laws, legally, a lot of the time, the extended family has a lot of say in funerals.
Like which ones? Because I hear, for instance, the corpse belongs to the family.
I think that our legal people may know better what the specifics of that, but I've also heard that. I've also heard that before. I don't know how, to the extent to which it is true, or whether it is being interpreted correctly. But yes, I've also heard that. And to the extent that I know that some people said extended families have put injunctions on funeral services before when
because
they
they
didn't get
believe
their
it's
way.
for them.
So that's why, as much as possible, you should try to keep the peace. Where you can compromise, you give a little, you take a little. So the things that you know you can do that they are demanding, you do them, so that at least they are a bit appeased and you don't create problems for
So
yourself.
are you saying that you who is grieving the loss, grieving the loss in the sense of you have lived with the person for a longer time, he's your daddy, he's your mommy, and you're feeling the grief more. And other people are coming in who are also making, claims that they also, he's my uncle, he looks after me when I was a child in school, and he's like this. That moment, what exactly do you do? Do you have to have a very, you have to have a listening ear?
Yeah. I think that helps sometimes. Sometimes you're not in a position to even do that, right? Sometimes all you're doing is trying to focus on what needs to get done for the funeral service to happen, and so that it's done beautifully or appropriately. So sometimes that's not even the thing on your mind. People who want to honor your loved one because he or she has played some kind of role in their lives in the past, I think it's a beautiful thing. I think it's it shows the kind of impact that people have on those around them. The difficulty is when they try to control things, and that's where you have to take some firm decisions. The main people who are sort of responsible for the funeral, you need to make some of those decisions, because otherwise there'll be 1,001 suggestions and opinions, and you'll find yourself just swaying from one thing to the other without a firm focus. The different people would have different ways of looking at things, but the family or the siblings or whoever is responsible for the funeral, you have to make some firm decisions at some point. Doesn't mean you exclude them. You can still have them play roles in the funeral service. You may put them in charge of certain things. I don't know, put them in charge of getting the ashes arranged, or of refreshments, or overseeing the cemetery process or something. You can include them in certain things, but not letting that sway what you need to do just to include everybody. I think that's important.
Yes, and it's still on this inclusive mindedness. If the person is a church-going person who's passed on, so the church has some role to play, the extended family has another role to play, you and your siblings, if that's the case, you have some role to play. So you think about all these things, I had to, when my father passed on, I had to go print the brochure. And then somebody told me, your father belongs to the Presbyterian Church. And in this town where he's going to be buried, a number of funerals are, celebrated together on a particular day. So there's one, service line that it takes. The hymns will have to be the same with all the other people who come. So it's the church and the pastor and the leaders who select the hymns. So go to them for the hymns, go to them for the order of service. You don't get into your own corner and do something and present to them.
Exactly.
So that way you can avoid a lot of the trouble that you have. Already you are grieving.
Yes, exactly.
That way you might not have that to anymore.
And that's an important thing about actually coping with grief generally. It's not only during the funeral service, but coping with the grief also means knowing when to ask for help. And so with something like the example you gave, knowing when to ask for help with the program, with the way the funeral needs to go, with who will officiate, all of those things are important. But even knowing when to ask for help with your day-to-day life. If at work you're struggling a bit to focus because you're still dealing with the grief, asking for help, speaking to colleagues or to your management to say, maybe I need a little extra time to be able to meet these deadlines because I'm struggling to focus from the grief. Those things are also important to do. Asking for help around the house and things like that. In the meantime, in the interim, they are good to do. That is maybe one of the reasons why traditionally when someone passes away, family members may come and stay over. So they take over some of those mundane tasks, the cooking, the cleaning, some of those decisions, so that you don't have to think about what will the children eat next and things like that. It can become problematic when they descend on you, when there are so many, when they are not going away. So there's that side of it too. But knowing when to ask for help and accept the help is also an important way to cope with a loss, because otherwise you'll be overwhelmed with all the things that need to happen.
What role can the church play with such a person who is grieving a loss? If a person happens to be a Christian,
okay,
he's in a church, for instance, what role? Without the person coming forward to tell the church, what role can the church play to help such a person who is grieving a loss?
Okay, I think that even if the person doesn't come forward to say or to ask, we can always ask questions. How can I help? That's always the basic thing, because if we also insist on processes, sometimes they may be maladaptive, or they may not work the way we are anticipating they would work. So the basic question, whether it's a church, whether it's a friend or a colleague, is how can I help? And then the person should be able to, or they should try to tell you what it is that they require from you. Sometimes there are just no words. It means you just may need to sit with them once in a while to check in on them, to see how are things going, how are you doing, do you need anything, or do you just want to talk it out? Would you like to just get away from everything? It's questions like that we can support. Of course, obviously, we need to pray with people, because grief or death can shake your faith. It can really shake your faith, especially if it comes in a very difficult way or in a sudden manner. Your faith can be shaken. You find yourself questioning God, questioning others, questioning what your purpose is or what you are doing. So praying with people, reminding them that you have them in mind, you are thinking about them, that they should take their time and work through it. Those things are so helpful, and the church can provide those supports. If you belong to groups and so on, these visitations we do, they can be comforting. Sometimes it is one of many, but if you have close links with people in groups and so on, and they are around you, it can be helpful as well. So really, it has to be the church or the people asking or identifying how they can help the person who is struggling. And on the other hand, if we are the ones who are grieving, we should learn to ask. We should learn to speak up. You don't have to shoulder all of the burden on your own. You reach out and get the help when you need to.
Lily, whilst we are with the person who is grieving a loss, as church people, we've gone to visit the person, we are praying with the person. Sometimes the person who is speaking to the one who is grieving a loss might not mean some of the things that he is saying. Let me put it clearly. Oh, as for this, you have to thank God for everything. How would the person who is grieving a loss take it in?
Yeah.
Let's thank God for what has happened to you.
Yeah. Those are difficult to hear. And I don't think, especially when it's come through a very tragic means. Logically, we know that's what it talks about. The Bible says, in all things, give thanks. We get that. But at that moment in time, they're trying to figure out why. Right? So you're telling them to thank God. The chances are very rare that immediately they will say, okay, thank you, God. Right? Most people do get to that point eventually. If they are Christians, they do get to the point where they say, well, I have to trust that, God, you know what you're doing. So we do get to that point eventually. But at the moment when they've lost their loved one and you come and you say, give thanks to God for everything, it's difficult to hear. Or when they say, the Lord gives and the Lord takes away, it's difficult to hear. You are reeling from the shock of this thing that has happened to you. So you want to hear words of comfort. I think of the story of when Jesus went to Lazarus's place with Mary and Martha and all. He didn't tell them, thank God that,
That's quite significant.
He allowed them to grieve. Or when he met the family that was grieving the girl who had died, and he raised them from the dead, he didn't tell them, thank God, God gives and God takes. He tried to comfort them, tried to give them words of reassurance and things like that. So I feel that that's the way we need to handle
one thing that
those
Jesus
things.
said about when he got to Lazarus' place, he said, "Oh no, that the glory of the Lord will be done." He says he's not dead, but he's asleep.
Asleep.
The people were wondering.
Yeah.
The person is, gone, and
Yeah.
he's sleeping.
Yeah, it's his
Those
strength
are
to
very
comfort.
comforting words.
Exactly.
Words of hope.
Exactly.
That emanated from Jesus Christ, that gave at least the sisters of Lazarus see it in a different light.
Exactly.
And when he shouted, Jesus just didn't speak softly. He shouted, and then Lazarus came
forth.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are different ways that we could go about all these
Yeah.
things that we are talking about.
Yeah.
But the most important thing, I think, for us who are helping the one who is grieving lost one, grieving lost one, is to really be very, empathetic.
Yeah.
Yes. Or as you might say some things that you're not
Yes.
supposed
Yeah.
to say.
And it's not to say that people who say these things are trying to make the person's pain worse. It's not. Usually it comes from a good place. Yeah, because they're also just trying to figure out, oh my goodness, what do I say to this person? They've just lost their dad, their spouse, their something. What do I even say to them? So it's coming from a good place most of the time. Unfortunately, sometimes it can be difficult to hear. So just simply saying, I'm sorry for what you're going through. I'm so sorry about this. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm so sorry that you're going through this. Or I can't even imagine how you're going through, but I'm here to support you. My sympathies, my condolences.
Yes.
It's basic like that. You do not need to explain what happened to them.
I don't know the words to use in Chi and Ga. I would have, put them in place of condolences and all
I
that.
think, if we see in Ga, sometimes the simple one they say is just, sorry. It's just that. And I think it is easier than for you to try and when you say things like give thanks or God gives and God takes away, it's you trying to sort of explain or justify why they should accept the loss. And so a lot of the time at those points, we are not ready for that. We are in a place where we are still trying to figure out that denial stage might even be still happening, or even anger. And then you go and say this, and it inflames things even more, makes the person feel worse than you had intended. So really just sometimes being there and saying my condolences or have my sympathies also, it makes a bigger difference.
You're still watching Let's Talk About, a program put together by Trinity United Church, Legon. We're finding out how we can help someone who has lost a dear one, and then the person is grieving, how you can help such a person. We'll take a short break, and then we'll be back.
With the growing challenges of life in light of both global and domestic development, the Christian is faced with the difficult task of balancing survival within a secular system and at the same time living a Christian life that pleases their Maker. It is for this reason that we need to have frank conversations on the many issues of life through the Christian lens. So, we bring to you Let's Talk About. On Let's Talk About, we talk about health, career, dating, marriage, family, divorce, politics, finance, and all the issues of life that the Christian is confronted with on a daily basis. Join us this and every Wednesday on the YouTube and Facebook pages of Trinity United Church Legon, and let's talk about life as Christians. With the growing challenges of life in light of both global and domestic development, the Christian is faced with the difficult task of balancing survival within a secular system and at the same time living a Christian life that pleases their Maker. It is for this reason that we need to have frank conversations on the many issues of life through the Christian lens. So, we bring to you Let's Talk About. On Let's Talk About, we talk about health, career, dating, marriage, family, divorce, politics, finance, and all the issues of life that the Christian is confronted with on a daily basis. Join us this and every Wednesday on the YouTube and Facebook pages of Trinity United Church Legon, and let's talk about life as Christians.
Yeah, welcome back to Let's Talk About, a program from Trinity United Church Legon. Today, we're discussing with Lily Kobe, somebody who is grieving a loss, how you can help that person out, or how you can yourself be of help to yourself. Let me put it that way, so you can go through the strains and the stresses of life, that has to do with all this. Now, we live on our social media platform, Trinity United Church Legon, as I told you, on both YouTube and Facebook. Now, send your questions and comments to our social media platforms or to our WhatsApp number 0501 579 996. Again, 0501 579 996. Yes, Lily, we have been talking about a number of things that we can do for us who are grieving a loss, or for those who are wanting to sympathize with that, some of the things that they could even do and say in order not to put more strain on us. And the last point that you raised about condolences, saying, I'm sorry, in Ghana, and there are some other things that we need not to say, like, oh, enyeshi. I didn't know yeshi.
Exactly.
So, am I right to say,
Yes.
don't tell such a person, oh, enyeshi?
Yeah, no, it's a loss. The person has lost somebody that means something to them or that matters to them. So yeah, it is not okay. We say those things to try and help. We'll say, it is well, it is okay, and all of that. I would say there are times for some of these phrases. Immediately the person is going through these things is not the time. But sometimes in the process of grieving, maybe the person has been through the funeral service and all of that, and then the person is still struggling with the grief after a few weeks or months. And actually it's still not good enough, but for you to say it's okay, you'll be fine, I think it's acceptable, it's helpful. So just encourage the person. Now, it's not strange or it's not unusual for them to feel what they're feeling, and it's okay to feel like sometimes you still need to cry, or to feel like sometimes you just don't want to be around people who will remind you of the person, and that's all okay. Our body tells us what we need a lot of the time, and we pay attention to it, and we can get through the process easier.
Yes, Trinity United Church Youth Choir is inviting all of you. It doesn't matter if you're a member of the Trinity United Church Legon, to a cantata duo. Cantate duo, yes. And the theme is Ascribe to the Lord, the glory due his name. And it's based on Psalm 29, verse 2. It's happening on Saturday, 13th August at Trinity United Church Legon, which is on the Trinity Theological Seminary campus. It starts 5:30 p.m. prompt. Here at Trinity, we obey our time. And as we obey our time, the time also obeys us. So we work out according to time. 5:30 p.m., the cantate duo sing praises to God. So let me go over it again so you'll not forget. The date is Saturday, 13th August, at Trinity United Church Legon on the Trinity Theological Seminary campus, 5:30 p.m., Saturday, 13th August. We need you all to be there. Yes. So, Lily, we've talked about the number of, when we started, we talked about the denial,
Right.
the anger part.
Yeah.
Is there anything further?
Yes. So we've talked about denial, we've talked about anger, a little bit about depression or feeling really down or really sad. There are some instances where there can be a period of sort of bargaining, right? And especially when you've lost, let's say you lose your child, or sometimes the person has killed themselves. Sometimes those are difficult, but you mean
those who commit murder?
Who commit suicide.
Suicide, sorry.
Yeah. Those are difficult losses to accept or to make sense of. Sometimes we find ourselves thinking, if only I had done this or I had done that, or if only I had noticed this or I had noticed that. It's almost like you're trying to bargain with their lives, or I mean with God, so that their lives would not have been lost. There are those moments as well. People can feel quite guilty about not having noticed something or not being present in a certain way and things like that. But all of these are stages that we go back and forth through. So sometimes you feel as though you've recognized or you've accepted the fact that the person is gone, and suddenly it hits you like, oh, it feels as though I'm still dreaming, even after some months. So grief is not a one-way thing. It's not a straightforward thing. Sometimes we go back and forth between different cycles. But at the ultimate end is acceptance. The final stage of the grieving process is acceptance, where we're able to recognize and accept that this person is no longer with us. It doesn't mean you don't miss them. It doesn't mean you don't think about them, but you recognize that that person is not there. They are not with you. The memories remain, so you are not despairing as much anymore. And that's what our aim is, to get to the point of acceptance.
Okay. Now there's a comment by Vaida Kwapuankufu. I think allowing oneself to grieve helps to get over the loss much better. Have the time and space to grieve.
Yes, absolutely. There's no formula. I think that's the main thing. And it doesn't work the same way for everybody. For some people, they are able to get to the place of acceptance or to find their equilibrium after a few weeks. But for some people, it can take months or even years. And for some people, you feel like you're doing okay, and then suddenly it grips you all over again when you remember the person or remember something about them. So yes, as I said, your body tells you what you need. You have to be in tune with not just your physical body, but your emotional self as well, and give yourself that time and space to grieve. Having said that, it's also important for us to recognize when our grief is getting out of control.
When does it get out of control?
In the sense that we are unable to do anything. We are not able to function. We are not able to do the things we need to do. Sometimes you can't even get out of bed. It's so strong on you. Immediately after the death has occurred, it could be a normal reaction for some people. But after a few months, if you're still not able to function, your daily activities you can't do because you are so weighed down by the pain or the sadness and things, then it's time to recognize that the grieving process is beyond your coping, and then you need to ask for some help. So in that sense, you can get some emotional support to help you understand what your body is going through and how you are reacting to it and so on. So give yourself the time and space to grieve, yes, but also recognize when that time and space is becoming like a crutch that you're using to avoid having to be confronted with the reality, and then you get some help to help you through it.
Who can you ask for such help from?
Well, of course, mental health professionals like myself are possible. But the lovely thing also is that many of our ministers these days have, and I'm talking about our kinds of churches, the mission churches, they've gone through pastoral counseling. So your pastors can also help. Sometimes it's just an older person who you feel comfortable with listening to you or encouraging you. So it's about exploring your networks and seeing what is available. And who you can lean on. If it needs to be a professional person to help, there are counseling psychologists, there are guidance counselors, there are clinical psychologists. All of those can help with that.
I realize through our conversations you've been not specifically talking about how to cope with all these things, but now I want you, although you mentioned bits and pieces of ways to cope, I want you to, put them together so we can have a mind of the ways that you handle such situations. Please send your comments or questions to our social media platform, YouTube and WhatsApp, and then Facebook. But for WhatsApp, the number to send your questions or comments is 0501 579 996. 0501 579 996. Yes, Lily.
Well, it's okay. So some things that you can do when you are trying to cope with grief. And just like Auntie Vida's comment, first of all, recognize that you need time, you need space to be able to cope with this kind of loss.
You need time
and space. Space does not have to be physical space, but it could be periods where you are allowing yourself to process what is happening. So you could be in a house with everybody else, but you are able to go away to a little corner by yourself, or even as you're sitting there reflecting back on what you're going through, why you're feeling the way you're doing, what you're doing about it, all of those things. So you need time. It may be cliched, but the adage is true that time heals.
Sometimes you see the visitors are coming and coming.
Yes. And then at night you are alone. You know.
And even before that, sometimes you want to be
by yourself,
space.
yeah.
Well, how do you handle
can
that?
ask, you are within your rights
for them to be told that no, you can't see them.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And it just needs to be said properly. You know, if you don't get up and say, get out of my house, I don't want to see you, that might be offensive to people who are trying to come and comfort you. But if you honestly tell somebody that I'm afraid I can't see you right now, I need some time on my, any rational person should be willing to respect that. So we have to learn to speak up. Of course, if you constantly want to do, there are certain sort of cultural expectations to a certain extent. So if you are constantly saying go away, go away, go away, even if you are saying it politely, sometimes it may create certain sentiments. So every once in a while, you may have to sort of come out of yourself and deal with what the expectations are. But you definitely need to take time by yourself and figure out how to just make sense of what's going on and how you are reacting.
Thank you very much, Lily. Lily, there is a question by Martha Amakese. I hope I got the name right. Excellent discussion. Thank you very much. Can one view death as a blessing, in quotes, and in that case, help the family or loved ones cope with the loss a bit better?
Yeah. Martha is a fellow psychologist.
Oh, okay.
So I'm sure I know where that's coming from. But absolutely, sometimes you can say, especially when you've got a loved one who has been, maybe they've had a terminal illness for some time, and you can see they are struggling. And the quality of their lives here haven't been so great for some time. Sometimes death seems like it's a relief for them to go and rest. So in that sense, it won't be that you are happy that they are dead. That's not the case. But you recognize the fact that the person can finally rest. The person will be pain-free and all of that. Those are sort of conscious things that you've got to think about and that you may remember. But it doesn't mean then you won't miss the person. So it doesn't have to be either or. You can recognize that it's good the person is resting, but you miss them, and you miss the things that you used to be able to do with them or the conversations that you had and all of that. So yes, sometimes death can be seen as a blessing in that sense, so the person can rest. Yeah.
So the one grieving the loss, it happens within a certain time. Is that the time, if you're a working person, is that the time to ask for some time off work and then have some time to have your space and time and all that? Yeah,
it helps if you can ask for time off of work, because of the emotional experience or the emotional reactions that we'll have. Concentration is very difficult during moments like that. Even if you're able to concentrate, a lot of the time people are only able to concentrate in short bits, So having to focus on a task at that point in time may be difficult. So if you have that opportunity and you can ask for time off, yes, I think you should. Especially immediately after it happens, even if you take about a week or two, if you are able to, I think you should take advantage of that. You definitely also have to bear in mind that you need time off when the funeral is going to happen.
Especially when the funeral is not about taking place so soon.
So
and
then,
some months
exactly,
before it takes place. Okay.
So then you don't take all your leave as soon as it happens. You have to do some planning as well, so that you can take time off when you need to during the funeral. But mostly it is also about dialogue. Right? Not all employers would do this, but there are quite a number of people who would understand if you say, I may need to go to family meetings or whatever, so maybe on this particular day I'll be a little late. But not to just say, I'm going for a meeting, I'll be late. I
You have
would
to be
say,
specific.
I would say yes, be specific, but also say I may come in a couple of hours late, so I'll stay a couple of hours extra, or something. It's showing most employers want to see what you are going to do or what you are proposing to do, so that the work still gets done at the end of the day. So dialogue is the thing. You have to talk to your employers or your supervisors or whoever it is, what needs to change or how you are proposing to meet those needs. You have to be upfront about it. So that it's not always that I have a family meeting and then you are gone. Or you come back from a family meeting at, let's say, 11, and then by 3 or so you say, well, I have to go again, and things like that. It will make employers frustrated, and then it can seem as though they are uncaring, but you have to have a game plan. Yeah.
Yes, Kofi Amankwa has, I don't know whether it's a comment or a question. Will it be right, it's a question I believe, will it be right to take on the medical personnel in cases where it's obvious your relative died as a result of negligence? Oh, okay, yeah. Is it right to take them on?
I can't decide what is the right approach. For everybody, it happens differently. I think what you need to think about is what taking on the medical personnel mean for you. It might just be your angry reaction to what has happened.
Maybe you believe that the person was giving wrong medication.
And that's entirely possible. Sometimes it may be possible, but you have to think of what it would mean for you and your family or those around you if you take this thing on. There are times when legal action is what is needed, and that's what is fair. So we do that if that's what the case is. But there are also times when it might not mean legal action, but it would mean ensuring that processes change. So there's, let's say, more monitoring or something like that. So you really have to think about what are your purposes and what is the end result you're anticipating if you take these kinds of actions. Some of the requirements when these things happen can also be difficult. I actually quite recently found out that in cases like that, when a court-ordered postmortem is required, you may have to be present during the postmortem. That's so difficult to see. To see your loved one being cut open and things like that might be very difficult to. So I mean, you have to think of a number of things. What will be the purpose of this action? What are you hoping to achieve with it? And so on. Sometimes there may be a different route, but if that's the route that you choose to take, well, it's a choice you have to make. It doesn't mean it will work the same for everybody.
And you have to be conscious of the fact that it might take quite some time.
Some time, exactly.
Are you prepared to invest, in quotes, in that kind of time to undergo all through what it might entail? Yeah. So those are all things, conversations and reflections that you have to have before you decide you want to go that route. As I said, sometimes it's necessary, right? Sometimes you believe an honest case can be made or a real case can be made for what was done wrong. But sometimes it might be that you just would wish that processes within the institution would be improved. So that is what you're trying to achieve. So it really is about the individual case and what it means for either the person or their family and so on. So yeah, there's no one answer. I guess that's the bottom line. Yes, and Lily, still on the coping.
Okay.
For me, that's very, very important.
Right.
Because once it happens, you know, a person you love so much is just, gone. It's up to you, the people who have lost the dear one, to be conscious of the fact that, well, there are ways that we could go about issues that will kind of bring down, the pain, So I'm still asking that you go over the points on coping with such a situation.
Sure.
Yes.
So I've talked about the fact that you have to give yourself time and space. But the other thing is that also recognizing that grieving is a process, as I've mentioned already. And so you may feel a certain way today and another way tomorrow. Recognizing those things are not a failing on your part is also important. So if it feels like you've been doing so well for, let's say, 6 months, and then on a particular day you wake up and you're feeling so sad or missing the person so much, it's okay to feel those things in those moments. Sometimes what you can do is to do things that remind you of them in a pleasant way or in a positive way. So making their favorite dish and eating it and remembering how you used to share that together with them, or going to a place that they enjoyed, things that you used to do with them. That nostalgia can be like accepting it and embracing it is what it is. Most of the time we try to push it down, we try to forget about it, but you need to embrace those emotions. For some people, they would like to, let's say, write a letter to that person.
Oh, really?
You know, pour out those emotions on paper.
And post it where?
No, not post it, but it's for your own purposes. So you write out the letter and you tell them what you would have wanted to say to them in person. I mean, these days with phones and things, like people would say, leave a voice note, or I know some people who keep the person's phone active, so they send them a WhatsApp message, things like that, you know. So it's little things that you can't make yourself forget about this person. So find things that would remind you of what was lovely about the time you spent together, the things you enjoyed doing, the things that, even if they frustrated you, the ways in which they used to annoy you, and all of those things. Embrace those kinds of memories and let yourself experience them. Then the other point is that when you are dealing with grief, and especially in the immediate aftermath of death, you have to remember that is not the time to make big decisions.
That's not the time to make
big decisions or important decisions. So if, let's say, you are in a job that, you know, even before your loved one passed away, you didn't quite like and all of that, at the point of grief is not when you decide to walk away. It shouldn't be, because your emotions are still all over the place. And that's making such decisions. Maybe they might work out best at the end of the day, but that's not the time that you have to consider all of the angles and the repercussions of these big decisions. So that's not when you go and blow all your savings on getting yourself a new car because you want to feel good about yourself and things like that. So avoid making big decisions. The little everyday things, that's fine, but no major life-changing things should be decided when you are still grieving. That's not to say if it takes you 1 year to finish grieving, you should wait on those things. But the immediate aftermath of the loss, you are not in a position to make those kinds of decisions. So take the time you need to feel stable or to feel balanced again. Then you can make those big decisions. And then the last thing that I wanted to add, another tip is don't turn to things like alcohol or drugs, sometimes smoking, or, you know, these days addictions include things like sports betting, watching all sorts of things on your phones or on the internet and things like, just so that you can try and forget the pain of the grief. Those things can rather create problems in the future. So do not use those things as coping mechanisms. Look for those other positive things like I've talked about to help you through the process.
Yes, there is another, let's see whether it's a question. Yeah, Daniel says it's interesting discussions. My question is, was this myth associated with death, especially in this part of our world that breeds fear and discomfort? As Christians, how do we deal with this? Okay.
I think, so maybe this is more of a question for Osofo, but in my lay view as a Christian, I think the uncertainty of what death means. I mean, as Christians, we know or we anticipate that we are going to heaven, right? To be with the Lord and all of that. But it isn't, for those of us left behind, it really isn't just something that we can see or there's nothing concrete to show you that this person is actually there, right? So the discomfort, the fear of what is happening to the person and all of that might come from those kinds of uncertainties. But also, because of our strong beliefs in like witches and evil and stuff, we may also wonder, did somebody do this to the person and all of that? So those kinds of emotions, they breed this fear and discomfort that he's talking about. To me, my position is always that, well, the way I see it, God is the Almighty, right? So when certain things have been allowed to happen, I have to trust that he knows what he's doing. Even if it was witchcraft or evil or something.
Even a violent death,
yes.
a sort of accident or whatever.
Yeah.
You know.
Eventually, I have to come to the point where I have to trust. From that hymn, simply trusting. You don't know, you don't understand it, you don't know why it should happen that way, but you have to come to the point where you trust that God, he's almighty. There's nothing that is more powerful than he is. And he's in control. He knows what is going on. I had an interesting reflection the other time that we mean so much to God that, I mean, when the scripture says the hairs on our head are numbered, it is not just to say he knows how many hairs you have on your head. If he knows how many hairs you have, that's one thing. But when it's numbered, this person said, it means even if one falls down, he knows which one it is. Even hairs on your head. So it's little things like that. It matters to God. And so if he's allowed something to happen, we have to trust that there's a higher purpose, or at the very least, there's something that we do not understand yet. Maybe those can be comforting for people. For me, it certainly is that I have to believe he knows what he's doing. Yeah.
And for us Christians, the Bible says that if we believe in Jesus Christ, though we will not die. That's the first part. Mm-hmm. But if he says, he continues, even if we die,
yeah,
yet shall we
live. Yeah.
So that's good enough word.
Yeah.
And a very strong word for us. So once again, we wish to remind you that the Trinity United Church Youth Choir invites you to the Cantate Deo. I hope I got it right. Cantate Deo. And the theme is Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. And it's based on Psalm 29 verse 2. It's happening on Saturday, 13th August at Trinity United Church Legon, which is on the Trinity Theological Seminary campus. 5:30 p.m. prompt. Cantate Deo, sing praises to God. So do not forget, 13th August, 5:30 p.m. Good. Now, so, Lily, we want to round up now, but we have looked at a number of scenarios. Close family, church people who can help us when we are, grieving our loss. But we haven't looked at the parts where our employers come in very much. Okay. Because you must have worked, let's take somebody who has worked with his boss or her boss for so many years. What can we do practically to help such a person?
When, let's say, the boss passes away?
When the member of the
team.
Yeah, has lost somebody. Yeah. What can we do to help?
Yeah. I think creating an environment or a culture within your workplace where people are allowed to express whether it's fear, whether it's sadness or disappointment or whatever, at the loss of that colleague or team member. I think that's always important. Employers should provide those avenues that people can express what they're feeling. They can start to talk about what had happened, because sometimes it's all quiet and nobody is saying anything, but everybody knows that there's something wrong. So talking about it is very important, but also recognizing that the things that you'll be required to do sometimes may remind you of your colleague, or there may be roles that you have to take on now because that person is no longer there, and it can make you feel a certain type of way. So I think you mentioned earlier that being forewarned means you are forearmed. So recognizing that sometimes things will remind you of that colleague, processes that maybe you never thought about because that person takes care of those details. Suddenly you are confronted with those things. And from time to time you feel that despair or sadness again. And it's okay to feel that way. So employers need to cultivate environments that allow people to express their grief but also to find ways to support them. So if it means creating support groups in the interim for people to meet from time to time and check in with each other. How are you doing? How are you feeling? How are you managing? Is there anything I can do to help you? Those things you have to cultivate. It won't happen on its own. So employers and people in workplaces need to cultivate those cultures where it's okay for you to talk about the difficulty and find ways to adjust the workflow. What can be difficult sometimes is the work needs to go on. So somebody has been lost, and by the next day or next week or next month, somebody else is in their role. That can be difficult to cope with, but reminding ourselves that the work needs to go on. It isn't because they don't value the person. It's because we need to find ways so that the work can continue. Those are also things to bear in mind.
And I think this point is very significant. Sometimes somebody has worked with you as an employer for a long time, and you never ever thought such a thing would happen to him or her, and it has happened. You have to make time, and do something for the person to feel really wanted. And it will bring about more togetherness.
Yes, exactly.
In the job place.
Exactly.
Yes,
so they don't feel like they are so dispensable and you forget about them so easily.
Well, all too soon, I think our time has come to an end for Let's Talk About, a program from Trinity United Church, Legon. And Dr. Lily Pobi has been here to help us look at grieving a loss, a dear one. Somebody who is grieving for a dear one. He's lost that person. What are some of the things that you could do? He's mentioned a lot. I cannot go over them all over again. I hope the points have been very, very substantial and very helpful. Thanks very much for your time today. Next week is another time. Hopefully, we'll be here to talk about something else. Do have a lovely night. Bye.